I burned his house down for a good reason, at least in my opinion. So I met this guy named Adam. Adam was someone I saw at the gym regularly. We would catch each other staring at each other and smiling. One day he asked if he could get my number and I agreed. Then we started sexting each other and flirting, and soon we hooked up on a regular basis. Then one day he asked me to go on a date with him, which wasn't usual. I asked him if he was interested in making this official, and he said yeah. So we went on a date, and I'm not gonna lie, there were a couple of red flags. He made a couple of misogynistic comments and even a racist comment towards Asians, saying they brought COVID to America. But I corrected him on that and he apologized. I asked him his opinion on what females should and shouldn't wear, and he said nothing too revealing, so I got up and walked out. He called me and asked me what I did wrong, and I told him that I'm going to dress however I want to. So it's either you put up with it or find someone else. And he said sorry and that he'd tolerate it. I said okay. So we ended up making it official. One day I slept over at his house and his phone was buzzing like crazy. I unlocked it with his face since he was a heavy sleeper. And there was a bunch of conversations with, "You will not believe what happens next. Come back for part 2. I used his face to unlock it since he was a heavy sleeper and I looked through his phone. There was a bunch of girls and it turns out he had been having conversations with them back and forth. He said things like he was single, he wasn't in a relationship. He was talking to one girl and her contact name was Frida. He was talking about the fact that he was glad he's been doing stuff with her for years and that he hates the girl that he was dating, saying that I was your typical annoying feminist. I waited until he woke up and I made my breakfast. When I was eating, he woke up, he came into the kitchen and jokingly asked, "Nothing for me?" And I said, "I don't know, maybe ask Frida since I'm annoying and a feminist." His face dropped and then he looked mad. He asked me why I'd been going through his phone and I told him because it was buzzing like crazy and I saw these girls. I asked him why bother making it official if he was going to continue with his old ways. He told me that he was the man of the relationship, so whatever he says go, and I shouldn't have a problem with that. I got up, packed my stuff for the night, and left. While I was starting my car up, he came outside with a bat and literally smashed my window in and smashed one of my rear mirrors. I ended up driving away safely, but this meant revenge, and you will not believe what happens next. Come back for part 3. I had to think of the perfect revenge to get back at him. So, I decided to set his house on fire. I knew his working schedule, so I took a sick day off and knew where he kept his spare keys. I unlocked the door and decided how I was going to do it. I was wearing gloves, a bodysuit, and a helmet, so no evidence will be found. He had a pan on the stove, so I thought to leave the stove on. I decided to turn the gas stove all the way up, and then it smelled like gas, meaning it was going to explode. I was about to leave, and then I realized he had a dog. I actually like this dog. Whenever Adam was an asshole towards me, it would always come and comfort me. Honestly, I felt like it should have been my dog more than anything. So I took the dog and never looked back. Then, just to add on to it, I realized he had a Mercedes waiting outside. He had an extra car, and used his other car for work. So I poked holes in 3 of the tires, and put a pebble in it. Insurance wouldn't cover it, and it'd be hard to fix. A week later on the news, they said there was a horrible fire, and it was his house. They were interviewing him, and he was crying. Karma's a bitch. Follow for more story times. I'll be tagging my business account in the caption, launching in a few weeks. My boyfriend's best friend tried to ruin our relationship. So I saw this guy in class on the first day of school and wanted to know his name. He was really cute. I asked my friend what his name was, and she said his name was Aiden. He was tall, had tan skin, straight black hair, a perfect jawline, and hazel eyes. Every girl was fawning over him. So one day I went to a party and I bumped into him, accidentally spilling booze on him, and I apologized. He just started laughing and said it was okay. When we started talking, we clicked immediately. You know that feeling when you're going to have a ride with that person, like emotionally, and you both grow? Yeah, that's what I had. We gave each other our Snapchats and we started talking regularly. Then some random girl added me on Snapchat. She sent me a chat and she asked if I was dating Aiden. I said no, and then she sent a dead skull emoji. I just ignored it because I'm not going to sit here and entertain that. So then I added her back and looked on her story, and there was a photo that she posted of her kissing Aiden on the cheek. I forwarded it to Aiden and asked if they were dating. He started typing and then he left the chat. You will not believe what happens next. Come back for part 2. Added her back and checked her story, and it was a picture of her kissing Aiden on the cheek. I forwarded it to Aiden and asked if they were dating, and he entered the chat for a millisecond and then left the chat. I texted him a question mark and he didn't respond. The next day at school, he tried to talk to me, and I looked him straight in the face and walked away and ignored him. He texted me while I was ignoring him all day, and I left him on delivery until he FaceTimed me. I explained I did exactly what he did, and he apologized and said he was busy for the moment. He explained to me that his best friend added me, Sophia, but that was his ex and they weren't dating. I said okay, but I was kind of suspicious about it. So prom was coming up and Aiden had the chance to ask me, and he did. So the next day at school, I saw Sophia all over Aiden, and I figured me and Aiden would be in the talking phase, but I guess not. When I got out of class, Aiden tried to say hello to me, but Sophia grabbed him by the arm and dragged him away. This happened multiple times throughout the day, until I got sick of it. During 7th period, when Aiden came to pick me up, I literally confronted her about it and told her to stop, and she just looked at me in shock, and then she walked away. After that, she didn't try anything, or so I thought. Come back for part 3. So I confronted her and she looked shocked and just walked away. I thought she would stop bothering us from now on, or so I thought. So I ended up getting ready for prom the next night and she texted me a knife emoji. I was confused but just ignored it. So we ended up going to prom and Aiden picked me up in his limo. He looked so hot. The first thing we did there was take pictures at the front. When we walked in, Sophia said hi to Aiden and then just snatched his face and kissed him. Without consent, mind you. He pushed her off and said back off. She said she was confused because he's been texting her and flirting with her. He said she was lying and she ended up pulling out her phone and showing me screenshots of the conversation. I looked at him and then ran off. After that, he chased me and then clarified everything. He said that those were faked and photoshopped. I asked him to show me proof since I didn't believe him, and he showed me their actual conversation on iMessage. We then walked over to her and then he cut her off. She ended up making a scene crying, begging for him back, but we just walked away. Luckily, we were able to bounce back and end up having a good time at prom. Take it from this story and don't be one of those girls. Follow for more story times and follow my Instagram as well.
This man was so widely hated throughout his town in Skidmore, Missouri that when he was murdered in broad daylight, no one outed the culprit. Ken Rex McElroy was born in 1934 and started his lifelong career as a criminal at a young age. He amassed a rap sheet of over a dozen felony charges including child abuse, sexual assault, burglary, and theft. He managed to escape prosecution and conviction for most of his crimes. One night, he shot a 70-year-old man in the neck and nearly killed him. McElroy only spent a single night in jail for it. He also taunted many of the town's members, getting away with these crimes as well. Obviously, many people hated him and wanted him gone. On the morning of 1981, McElroy's appeal hearing was again delayed and the townspeople met up with their sheriff to discuss how to protect themselves. During the meeting, McElroy went to the tavern and started drinking at the bar. The men at the meeting got wind that he was in town. The sheriff told the group to form a neighborhood watch instead of confronting him, but then quickly drove out of town in his police cruiser. The people at the meeting swarmed the bar, and as McElroy got into his truck, he was shot from at least 2 different firearms in front of around 45 people. His wife, Trina, was in the car with him when he got shot. No one called for an ambulance, and no one besides Trina claimed to identify the gunman. Crime Fanatic Friday Part 2. After the most hated man in town was gunned down, no one from the 45 people who witnessed the crime came forward to identify the culprit except his wife. Trina McElroy said that she told the county who had shot her husband, but the panel didn't return an indictment, which made it look like law enforcement was covering it up. The FBI entered the case and started to threaten people for more information, but no matter how much investigators dug, Skidmore residents maintained their silence. A federal grand jury stepped in again, but once again, there were no indictments. Many wondered why the man that Trina pointed out wasn't charged. It's because there simply wasn't sufficient evidence to go to trial. Those who witnessed the killing went stone silent and didn't speak of it again. Many people believe that lives were saved when Ken McElroy's was taken. To this day, no one has ever come forward with any new information pointing to the killer, and the case has remained unsolved. His wife Trina remarried and had a fairly normal life. She left Skidmore and refused to do any interviews. She passed away in 2012. The man she named as McElroy's killer died of liver cirrhosis in 2009. He made no confessions on his deathbed. This case was covered in an award-winning series called No One Saw a Thing. Do you think McElroy deserved it?
I'm going to start a series of doing my makeup over my own scary childhood stories. Up until I was about 16, I didn't know how to put a barrier up on my own energetic fields, so I used to see a lot of stuff and experience a lot of different dimensions. The first story starts when I was 2. I don't remember it much, but my parents have told me this multiple times. We lived in this little white house. It was very old. My parents used to always hear me laughing and playing in my room with someone, but there was no one in my room. When they asked who I was talking to, I told them it was a little boy named Omar. They thought it was just an imaginary friend, but now that I think back on it, when I was 3 and 4, I did see someone. He was always very kind to me. I would play Barbies and he would play with me. He would draw me pictures. I would leave my books out for him so he could read while I was at preschool. I would tell him about my days and he would tell me about his. But things started to get really weird once my brother was born, and that is when my parents started to see him too. They believe that this is because he wanted to be the only little boy in the house. Stay tuned for part 2. Here is part 2 of the series of the little boy. If you haven't seen part 1, go watch that first because it won't make sense if you don't watch that. Up until I was 16, I didn't know how to put a barrier up on my own energetic fields, so I used to see a lot of things. When my brother was born, my parents used to sense and see the little boy as well. My mom used to feel his energy sitting in the rocking chair. My brother's mechanical toys used to just start making noise. He started to show up less and less in my room, and every time he would, he kind of scared me. He wasn't himself anymore. He was mad, angry, everything. My parents believe it's just because he wanted to be seen and he was lonely, and now that I had a little brother, I wasn't paying as much attention to the little boy. My mom would wake up to my brother crying in the middle of the night and go check on him, and she would sense something standing next to her. Weeks later, we moved out of that house due to a shooting in our backyard. My old nanny, who lived across the street, told us after we moved out, she would always see something in the window of my room. To this day, Omar still shows up in my dreams.